Hi, this is Matt Bianca, and welcome to the Sutra Pills podcast. This is the place to listen to some teachings from original Buddhist sutras. A sutra a day keeps the dukkha away.
In this episode, again, we are not talking about specific sutra, but we keep going with our discourse in our chat about the origin, the historical background, etc. And it will be the last time for a while, and then we'll come back to our next usual specific sutra. So the first Buddhist council. During Siddhartha's life, his speeches were memorized by elderly monks and nuns, repeated in small groups to verify their accuracy. Being trained, they had an exceptional memory, thanks to a high degree of concentration. And here arises, perhaps, the first misunderstanding. This repetition probably took place in the form of chanting because it was the most intelligent way to preserve these teachings. Let us remember that writing was not yet prevalent and, above all, not equally distributed among the population. So these chants were not part of religious rituals. A shared oral tradition was much more accurate and authentic than the memory of one individual. A month after his death, his disciples organized the first council. The purpose was only to verify and maintain the authenticity of Dharma, the law taught by Siddhartha. One of the senior monks, Mahakassapa, was the facilitator of this event. It was decided by more than 500 monks to divide the teachings contained in the two books mentioned above, mentioned in the previous episode, basically the Vinaya and the Sutra Pitaka. The Vinaya Pitaka was written by Upali, a monk known for his total understanding of a monastic discipline. Instead, Ananda, Gautama's cousin and later disciple, recognized by all the others as a man of perfect memory, dealt with the second book. Ananda remembered every detail. The subject, the location, and the people was there. In about 7 months, these 500 monks recited everything they remember about Siddhartha's teaching. Their recitations were constantly compared to each other to certify their accuracy. Once they were accepted by all present, they became the second book. There were two important issues which arose in this council. The first was the cancellation of some rules included in Vinaya. Before he died, Siddhartha told Ananda that some of the less important rules could be deleted, but he did not have time to say which rules they were. So Mahakassapa decided to not delete any of them. In addition, Mahakassapa decided that the Pitaka Sutra would be divided into 5 categories, very similar to the ones that I've reached us today. And then we arrived to the second Buddhist council. The second council was held about 100 years after the first. The same method was adopted, although there were those who wanted to delete some rules and add new ones. In fact, a revisionist group called the Mahasangikas protested. They desired a Dharma that was more mystical and visionary, reshaping Siddhartha Buddha into a deity, one among the numerous boundless Buddhist gods of the past and future. This transformation can be observed in several schools that emerged after his passing. They create further division in the Sangha. Sangha is the group of disciples, by declaring that Siddhartha's life was certainly not that of an ordinary human being. This contradiction was intended to support the idea of a Buddha god. Once the deification of Siddhartha was permitted, it created the basis for transforming Buddhism into a religion. Here is the key to understand when it changed from philosophy to religion. And that because by establishing a supernatural being, there was no longer any need to verify the authenticity of monks' narratives. This new version for the second Buddhist council could certainly not be rejected as a Siddhartha's teachings. The emergence and evolution of the concept of Buddha gods in Buddhism were likely influenced by a variety of factors. Among these, a significant factor was the expansion of the Buddhist Sangha, its engagement with lay communities and other religious groups, along with the passing, of course, of Gautama Buddha. And then, years later, we arrived to the third Buddhist council. During the reign of Ashoka, who promoted Buddhism in his era, he established a monument that marked several significant sites in the life of Gautama. It might not be a coincidence that his name means painless. The third council was held about 120 years after the second. By that time, several sects had formed following the Mahasangikas. Remember, the guy that was protested before in the second council. The president of this council, called Magaliputta Tissa, compiled a book called Katavattu, literally the collection of controversial points. In this manuscript are mystical practices that were accepted as dharmic practice. It did so precisely to reject the practice and alienate the practitioners. So it was a list created just, I don't want to say forbidden, but just to say like, okay, this one is not what Gautama say. And then the Theravadin, a sect separated from the Mahasangika, promoted the initiative. Theravada is like the precursor, the pioneer for the Theravada, one of the two main branches in religious Buddhism. From that moment on, two distinct groups formed. Katavato later became the most significant written document in Buddhist literature. How funny it is, no? Was something created to not fall and then became the most important. It was also integrated into the third book of the modern Pali Canon, the Abhidharma, which is called roughly the basket of further doctrine. The Theravada adopt the most psychological and philosophical teachings contained in Abhidharma. However, they continue to preserve their oral tradition of Sutra and Vinaya Pitaka. So the Theravada and the Theravada are the closest to the early Buddhists. Not the identical, but the closest. In fact, for many centuries they consider themselves Hinayana, literally the small vehicle, the holders of Buddhism's origins. This term, in contrast to the term Mahayana, which is called also like the Tibetan Buddhist, that is the Mahayana, was misunderstood as derogatory, giving the adjective hina, that is small, inferior, a pejorative meaning, as if it were incomplete. Hinayana also described the geographical area in which it spread, namely now Southeast Asia. Mahayana, from the adjective ma, which means larger, upper, north, spread in a larger area that includes the current state of Nepal, India, China, Japan, and Korea. Who is not a current aware about the political situation, of course, Tibet is in China. That's with somebody like, oh, what about Tibetan Buddhists? Yeah, because it's in China, it's there. So from that moment, the following council were very distinct, divided into two or even more sects. And who was to blame? Who have to blame for this kind of thing? What was called later the third book, the third Bhaksis, Abhidharma. So the Abhidharma is a complete text. In short, it's the explanation of conditioned production, a key concept in Buddhism that we will analyze like in other episode. The Amasingakas introduced some sort of mythologies through the third book. It's said that in the 7th year after his awakening, the Buddha God left the physical world to go to a kingdom of demigods. And from there he taught what would later be included in Abhidharma. The first Mahayana Sutra appeared in the 1st century BCE. So you understand, the 1st century, so like way long far that was Gautama died. With the spontaneous introduction of new sutras, Gautama's teaching began to lose that originality of the early days, becoming increasingly obscure. Some of the most famous Mahayana Sutra are directly in contradiction with the original teachings. The Heart Sutra, for example, which appeared 1400 years after Gautama's death, is the teaching of a Hindu deity called Avalokitesvara, and I never know how to pronounce this name, sorry, which is like a reincarnating in Sariputta, an elderly monk of the original Sangha. This sutra challenges the teachings of the Four Noble Truths by declaring that there is only emptiness. Moreover, it claims that only this sutra is the final truth or non-attachment. Moreover, it presents the ideal of the Bodhisattva as the highest goal in Buddhism, reducing the value completely of the Four Noble Truths. Throughout the sutra, Gautama is described before his awakening as an awakened Bodhisattva. It did so, Gautama did so to call himself some kind of Bodhisattva, did so to describe himself as a being of great compassion, who still required the development of a condition that would bind human beings to ignorance in order to fully awake. And then we have another famous sutra, is the Diamond Sutra. It appears in 500 BC and follows more or less what is already contained in that of the Heart, so the Heart Sutra. It also altered the concept of conditioned production, using a vague mythological creation. I will use the term conditioned production instead of the more familiar dependent origination, as it is more appropriate translation. However, the biggest difference between the original teachings and the Mahayana tradition is the Lotus Sutra. In this sutra, Bodhisattva is a superior being to all the principles of Buddhism, including the Noble Eightfold Path. Unfortunately, it has become a fundamental text in the most widespread traditions, such as Zen, Chan, and Tibetan. Siddhartha Gautama had no intention of founding a religious order. However, it happened. Each successive school has its own lineage, patrons, and patriarchs. There is no evidence that Gautama had asked or ordered any of this. In the Pali Canon, there is no evidence that Gautama started a path of salvation by becoming a bodhisattva. His theory was quite simple. No one can save us except ourselves. Meditation is another interesting case of alteration. In the two original books, there is no indication of the length of the meditation and particular techniques invented after Gautama's death. It's interesting how he anticipates this adaptation. In Dirghagama, or Digha Nikaya 16, he states, and here I quote, "The end of what I taught you will not come from direct oppression, but from confused dharma." As you can see, I never used directly the term Buddha because Buddha was neither a Buddhist nor a god.
This has been the Sutra Pills podcast, and I am Matt Bianca. Thank you to be here and listen to me. Comments are really appreciated. Whatever you want to tell me, just make a comment, even a bad one. Of course, the most important, may you be well, may you be happy, may you be free from suffering. Bye for now.